Hi, I'm Brian Johnson, and this is Better Cocktails at Home. We're here in the Quarterdeck Club, which is our home bar, and for this month, we're going to do a series on making punch. Now, I've wanted to do this for a long time because I love making punch. I don't do it as often as I would like because it's fairly involved, and especially it just I don't know, it's a different thing than making cocktails, right? And so kind of I want to take some videos to kind of look at a couple of different punches, making it different size punches, some of the tools you're going to need, and some of the things you can do with it. So this first episode, I wanted to talk about just some of the things that are a little bit different than making cocktails, right? So punches are super old. And they, I think, require a different skill set in a lot of ways. Like some of it's similar to making cocktails, but in some ways, I think it's more like cooking. And so actually, I hate cooking. I can't stand it. But I think it's from what cooking I have done. It seems almost more like that in some ways. And so, yeah, I just want to kind of talk through some of the things I use in making punch and then some of the kind of little tips I've learned along the ways that I've experienced. Yeah, so we're just going to walk through it and then hopefully that'll kind of inspire you to kind of start building your punch arsenal, if you will. So I think the first thing that I would say is required of making punches, or, highly recommended, is this book here by David Wondrich, Punch. It is kind of like, I think, like the Bible of punch making. It's got like history, recipes, techniques, ingredients, and it's just an amazing read. I love it. It's got some like great illustrations in it from historical cartoons and all different kinds of stuff. So I think if you're going to really get into making punches seriously, I would just start here, read this whole thing front to back, just enjoy it, and then kind of just take it in, make a punch or two, and then kind of like reference it again. Pretty much every time I make a punch, I go back to this book, go through it, flip through it, review it, just kind of remind myself some of the techniques and stuff because I'm not making punch every single day. So to me, that's like number one most important thing if you're going to make punch seriously at home. So let's move on to some other things that are a little bit different than making cocktails. So if you're making punch at a large scale, you might even have a giant food safe bucket, that kind of stuff. If you're going to be making, like I said, large punches, right? It can be actually really useful for mixing stuff all together and getting consistency. Because oftentimes when I've tried to make large punches, I didn't have this necessarily. I was trying to use like 8-quart pots, and you'd get, oh, I'm kind of making half the punch here and half the punch here, but it can be hard to kind of balance it so it's all correct and similar. So for making large scale, getting something like this is super critical. I think it's a nice step. And honestly, this was like $14. It's not a lot of money. Next thing is obviously alcohol. I like when I'm making punches, usually at a larger scale, for more than a few people. I'm buying the 1.75 liter bottles. It's obviously a little more like economical that way. Also, I like the fact that once I'm done mixing it, right, I actually put it back in here so I can more easily fit it into the fridge to chill if I'm making a cold punch. So I like kind of reusing the bottles for that. Larger measuring cups. You're probably not going to be making, if you're making more than for a couple people, you're not going to be making jigger size ingredients. So I'm using, 4 cups, a quart, that's really the scale you're looking at more often. Funnel. I use this for various things when I'm trying to put it back in the bottles or if I'm transferring it between vessels or pots, pans. These funnels come in handy. Kind of a larger colander strainer. I use this to kind of do an initial, all the citrus, kind of an initial like filter of the pulp and anything that's in it. If you tried to do it with like a fine mesh strainer, which I do use for making punch, the first time it's just going to take you forever because it's going to go so slow. So I use this to kind of do one quick one initially, and then I do use a fine mesh strainer to get any pulp out before I kind of mix into the final punch, just because I hate having pulp in my stuff. I just don't like it. Some kind of like citrus peeler. Obviously we use these in cocktails making, so it's not really a different tool. But with punch, if you're going to be making oleosaccharides, this is super, makes it easy. However you want to get a peel, right? Because you're going to have to use peel and you're going to have to kind of mix it with sugar. So this becomes even more important, I think, in punch making than in cocktailing. Thinking about citrus juicing. So normally, like if I'm at home making drinks for a few people, or even if I'm like pre-juicing for maybe like even up to like 10 people making cocktails, usually the volume is enough that I'll use an elbow juicer. That's kind of my go-to. I've used it for over a decade now. But if I'm making punch and I'm making any kind of volume, I almost always use this for citrus. It's just faster, easier, and you can kind of like a nice like production going. So I personally find it to be a more efficient citrus juicer when I'm making a lot of punch. In conjunction with that, I use food grade gloves. Religiously, I'm making punch just because you're like grabbing limes, you're doing stuff, and just your hands can just get all kinds of gross real fast. So I find the gloves make it a lot easier processing all the citrus and that kind of stuff. Punch bowls, right? Like you can obviously serve out whatever you want to, but if you're making punch, it's fun to have punch bowls. So like you have a couple different sizes here. This is a great little size for like 4 people. It holds a nice little amount for that. Ladles, obviously. Larger punch bowl, this is probably good for 20 people plus. And then, so kind of just having a range is nice to kind of tailor your punch to your audience. And then these little guys, these are kind of like food safe containers. They are great for a number of things when you're making punch, because whether you're doing a bunch of like citrus juicing or you're transferring stuff from one bowl to another as you're mixing it, or if you're freezing blocks of ice, so fill these up with water, put them in the freezer ahead of time, and you get nice big blocks of ice for your punch bowl. So these can be used for a number of things. I just find they come in really handy in the punch making process. So those are kind of like the sort of different cocktail tools, different than cocktail tools I use when I make punch. Some of the things to think about is kind of planning. I have to plan much more ahead of time when I'm making punch, just because you either want stuff to chill in advance, or if you're making hot punch, you want to plan for that, how you're going to serve it. So I think punch just requires a little more thought in my experience. And again, I don't make it every day, but it's different enough that it kind of makes me think a little bit. In cocktails, it's like second nature. I can kind of make them, no big deal, like improvise on the fly. Punch is just a different animal, I think, and having the right tools makes it a lot easier because you're just dealing with a different scale. And so these are some things I use. I find them really helpful. If you have any other little punch tips or tools that you love for making punch, I'd love to hear about them, because I'm always looking for stuff to make it easier to make punch. But yeah, thanks so much for watching Better Cocktails at Home, and we're going to see you on the next episode.